Hey, this is Aaron.
And Blake, we're AB Data.
Thanks for walking through this Alteryx Weekly challenge with us.
In this video, we're taking a look at Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 196. This challenge gives us some raw data that is delimited with a pipe character that we need to clean up and transform, and then answer some questions about the quarterly profit margin. And this challenge has an interesting way of defining a quarter for each of our customer IDs. It's going to be the very first quarter that they're a customer of ours, not necessarily a given quarter within a given year. And then there's a secondary data table called costs that we'll use to join in some relevant cost and revenue data so we can determine this profit margin. The first tool we're bringing in is a text to columns tool to parse out the contract's raw data into 3 new fields. We could also use some regex here, but it might be easiest to see if we just use the text to columns tool to create these new fields. We can copy and paste the delimiter character if we're not sure where to find it on the keyboard with the cell viewer. And now that we have created these new fields, we want to trim the extra white space characters that show up after and possibly before some of our characters in these new fields 1, 2, and 3. And to do this in one easy step, we can use the multi-field formula and apply the trim function to all of the current fields that are selected in the multi-field formula tool. Running the workflow and looking at the output, we see all the red warnings have gone away, and all of our text is showing 100% okay. Now, in order to map in the field names, we could use a select tool and type them in, but to do it on a more dynamic basis, maybe instead of 3 fields, we were creating 10 fields, and we didn't want to type them all out. Here we can use the field info tool to create a data point from the actual metadata, so the field name. And again, we can use the text to columns tool to parse that data into multiple items, but this time we're going to split to rows. So essentially what we're doing is using the field info to grab the metadata, and then text to columns to create a lookup table. And here I'm throwing in a record ID tool just to have a reference point for our field names as they come out of the multi-field formula tool. So you'll see that there is a tool called dynamic rename with an optional second input, and this is a great use case for the rename mode of taking the field names from the right input rows. When we select this from the dropdown, we can then tell Alteryx that we want to pull the old field names from record ID, so 1, 2, and 3 in this list, and we want to replace them with what's in the field called name. So the input for the dynamic rename tool, we have these fields called 1, 2, and 3. And the output, we've got client ID, contract date, and order volume. So here it works really nicely with 3 fields. It would work the same with 10 fields or 100 fields. And also work on a dynamic basis if the positioning changes from run to run. Now that we've isolated the contract date, we want to change it from a string into an actual date time field so that we can properly sort on it. Selecting the contract date field and then the proper pattern, in this case the month / year, the date time parse tool will convert that into an Alteryx datetime format. Adding a sort tool allows us to sort by this new datetime outfield in addition to client ID, so we can see the first data point for each client ID, and they're given to us now in ascending order. This is going to help us identify the quarter for each client ID. And to do so, we can bring in the tile tool. So we're going to use a unique value tile method, and for each unique client ID, I want to create tiles or groups that essentially add a sequence number for each of our client IDs, starting with 1 and going until the next client ID is in our list. So in this snapshot of the data point, the tile sequence number is really our quarter number. So we can bring in a select tool and update some of these field names and drop off some of the fields that we don't need anymore. Here I'm renaming date time out, which is the date type field, to contract date, and then renaming the tile sequence number to quarters. So here we've cleaned up the data table and really only kept the relevant information. Now, in order to join in the cost data, which is given to us based on the year, we need to isolate the year for each of our records. And so we're going to use a formula tool to create a new field called year. And if I just start typing the word year, it's going to pull through the date time year function. You can also find this through the blue f of x. And in order to really determine what data type we want, here we need to see what the data type is for the year that we're going to join it against. So looking over at the costs data table, looking at the metadata, I see that year is an int 16 or a numeric data type, and that would give me problems when trying to join with a VW string, which is the default from the formula tool. Using a join tool, we can now join year from our main data stream to the year in the costs, now that they are both integer data types. And here our goal is to append the quarterly premium, the per unit fee for customers, and the per unit production cost to each of our data points from the main data stream. Now, just to ensure that none of our records are falling out of the join, I'm going to turn the connection progress on to show, and each of our 992 data points has found a match, and it looks like there's one record from our cost data table that's falling out from the year 2000. So just as a quick sanity check to make sure no important information is falling out, I'm going to look at the browse for the join data, and it looks like the first year is 2001. So the year 2000 is not present in the data table, but that would be expected because really the first data point for our clients begins in 2001. Now that all the data has been joined together, we can add a formula tool to perform our first calculation. And here refer to the tool container in the top right of the canvas. But we're going to add two columns, starting with cost. And the cost can be defined as the order volume, or the number of units, multiplied by the per unit production cost. Now, ultimately, this is a numeric value, and we want to leave this as a double, but you might see I'm getting an error in the formula tool. It's trying to apply a numeric operator to a string value. So going one step before to the join tool, let's make sure that all of our numeric values that we want to perform math with are thought of as numeric field types, so doubles, integers, fixed decimals, and the like. Now that both these fields are numeric field types, we can easily perform our multiplication for the cost field. And then for revenue, we'll start with the field of quarterly premium plus the product of the order volume and the per unit fee per customers. The syntax in Alteryx is very flexible. You see here I've broken the two main components to our function onto separate lines. We could also add comments if we'd like to. Scrolling in to get a better look at the formulas, we can validate that they match the tool container up above. And we have calculated cost and revenue for each of our data points. Now the main point of the exercise here is to identify each of the quarters for each of our client IDs and determine the profit margin. So if we group by the quarters and then sum the cost and revenue, with one additional tool, we can then determine that profit margin. So the margin percentage can be expressed by taking the difference in the sum of revenue and the sum of cost and then dividing that by the sum of revenue. And leaving the data type as a double will leave us with a number. So when we sort to identify the quarter with the largest margin percentage, we'll see the largest value on top. And the final tool we need to add to the canvas here is the sort tool. And we can see each of our 72 quarters and the margin percentage in each. And we see the 11th quarter is the quarter for our customers with the largest individual margin percentage. So taking a look at the finished product of our solution here, adding some tool containers, comment boxes, and annotations. Really, we can think of our workflow as taking place in two main steps. The first step here is to really clean up the data and identify the quarters. Then after joining in the cost data, we can perform our calculations and sort to determine the quarter with the largest margin percentage.
Thank you for learning with us today. Good luck on your Alteryx journey.
For more information on custom training, managed service automations, and more, please visit our website at abdataconsulting.com.